All right, folks. Time's up. Pencils down. Pass your papers to the aisle. Okay, let me see a show of hands. How many of you dealt with preemptive prayer? You guys need to pray about this. Okay, how many with basic Bible? And cost commitment? Interesting. And missional multiplication? I'm not sure what that says, but it's interesting. You know, to me, they're all challenging, in their own ways, but, the cost commitment piece, I think that something tells me that behind that there's a lot of energy. If people would really up their commitment levels, you could really see some exciting things happen. We've got about a half hour left, so I want to touch on a couple things. First of all, I want to talk about kind of a personal mission field. It's not in your book. And then I want to close off by introducing the life cycle, which we'll deal with quite a bit first thing in the morning. When it comes to, who am I going to witness to? Who am I going to reach? Who's my personal mission field? These are people you already know. I mean, I don't know how many people are in this room, but I don't know. Let's say it's 40 people or 30 people or something. Imagine how many people this group of people collectively knows. We're talking hundreds of people. Okay? Thousands of people. Millions of people. Okay? Now it's down to what? It used to be 6 degrees of separation. Now it's down to 3.7 or something. Okay? You feel the force of that? If you just, if there was a bubble above each of your heads with a listing of everyone you know in that bubble, that's a mission field. And this is not something that you have to kind of create and go search for. It's there. It's a matter of, in a sense, leverage. It's a matter of leveraging the relationships that you're already in, or selectively placing yourself in certain relationships. This concept is named various things. I've heard it referred to as circles of influence, spheres of influence, personal mission field. But the way it works is you just simply make a list of, make a list of the different groupings of people in your life. There are people in my family. There are people at work. There are people in the neighborhood. There are these other affinity groups. I'm in the chess club. I belong to the Rotary Club. I do, marathon running. There's a gazillion things that people are involved with. Well, you identify what those spheres are, and then you list all the names of the people under each one that you know. Now, at that point, you've got a kind of a large, sweeping canvas of a potential mission field. Well, I'm going to call this strategic. But now we want to take it to the spiritual side. And I want to start praying about these people by name and thinking through, of the 12 people in this particular category, who are the one or two that might be more receptive? So I'm sort of categorizing now. And, you look for clues. Things happen in people's lives that God will tend to leverage in bringing them into the family. For example, let's see, crisis, okay? Thank you. It's not enough to have a pen. You have to have one that actually writes. Okay, crisis. Has anyone in this room lived a completely crisis-free existence? Okay? Stuff happens. And when it happens, it's a moment. It's a teachable moment. How many times does somebody show up to the church? Lost a job or this or that and the other thing. Crisis happens, people can turn to God. Another thing that happens, as I mentioned before, children. Pagans have kids and then want to go to church. Go figure. Well, the Spirit of God is weaving stuff inside, okay? Another thing I just call is curiosity. You have people that have not a spiritual bone in their bodies, and then all of a sudden, they're wondering about things. I'm finding in my crowd, I just turned 65 in July, and I'm finding that a lot of people that I was involved with in high school and college are all of a sudden reappearing. There's like this, my high school class, my wife and I are same class, same school. We met in the 8th grade, got married when we were 12, So, anyway, so her friends are my friends and that sort of thing. So, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here comes this email. We're trying to get our graduating class back together. And there's a Facebook presence and a this and a that, and a guys group that meets once a month, and a women's group that meets once a month, and the annual barbecue, and the 5-year reunion. And it's like a groundswell. I think what's happened is, as people get older, they start realizing that this mortality thing's for real. Same thing is happening with a fraternity that I was in college. I was only at this school for 1 year. I was at a lot of schools for 1 year. Okay? I get so much alumni mail, it's not funny. But all of a sudden, these guys, it's like all the guys that were in this fraternity in the 70s, we want to start getting together. And there's like 180 people on this list now. And I'm on the steering committee, and we meet at a sports bar, and we plan events. And we have to plan them really fast, because within about 45 minutes, they're all trashed. Okay, you get that? Guys in their mid-60s still talking about getting wasted last Friday night. Seriously. Now, let me share one little crazy story about this, how this works. See, to me, this is my affinity group. I got my high school thing going. I've got this college frat thing going now. And I was like the worst frat guy ever. Okay? On hell night of my pledge class, I didn't even know who my big brother was. That's how bad I was. But anyway, I'm in because I'm on the list. There's a guy that I just met maybe a year ago now who's on the steering committee with me. He is a Jewish atheist who is very hostile toward organized religion. Okay? He's also a musician. And years ago, when I was playing music, he and I didn't know each other, but we kind of traveled in similar circles. We know a lot of the same people. All right, so picture, this cracks me up. About 2 times ago, we're having this meeting, and this gentleman, his name is Fred, and another guy, also a musician. We were talking about the good old days and who we knew and who we played with and that sort of thing. And so this fella, Danny, says to me, "Ken, do you know a guy named Stanley Bernstein?" I said, "Yeah, I know Stanley." I said, "In fact, Stanley did synthesizer work on an album I recorded in 1979. And he goes, "You recorded an album?" I said, "Yeah, I did an album in 1979, kind of contemporary Christian music kind of stuff." And Stanley played on a record. Well, it occurred to me that someone else played on that record that would be very important to Fred. So I turned to Fred and I said, do you know the name Elliot Randall? And he says, you mean Elliot Randall, like New York guitarist, session player, Saturday Night Live band, toured with the Doobie Brothers, toured with Steely Dan, et cetera, et cetera. I said, yeah, that Elliot Randall. He said, yeah, of course I know who he is. I said, well, he did the guitar work on my record. I can't say exactly how Fred responded to that in mixed company. But guess what? Fred wants to hear my record because Elliot Randall did the guitar work on it in 1979. So I've got a Jewish atheist about to listen to my Christian album from 1979. Who does that kind of stuff but God, right? Okay, well, all of this happening because I decided to get on the steering committee of this frat group. Things happen. So, you put yourself out there, you make it happen. I met a guy on a plane today who actually lives near me and who is a trainer consultant in the area of, crisis intervention. He works with people like that work at hospitals and whatnot that, when people kind of go off, how you get people under control and that kind of thing. So anyway, he's got this group that he's putting together. It's an entrepreneurial group. They got about 120 people in this group, and they have monthly get-togethers, and anywhere from like 12 to 15 to 20 people show up at these monthly get-togethers. And they just talk about business and making new stuff. And so he's asked me, would you like to be part of that entrepreneurial group? It's on this thing called meetup.com. You know that thing? Okay, meetup.com. Well, he's a meetup guy, so whatever. So all of a sudden, I've got another affinity group. So who knows where these things will go? But, I'm sure that everyone in this room could come up with 6 or 8 or 10 people that could be on your primary radar screen. Start praying about their lives, God to move in their lives. Get to, put yourself out there and see what happens. Okay? It's a very, very simple approach. Now, the last thing I want to do tonight before we call it an evening, I want to introduce the church life cycle. If you'll turn over to page 25. And we'll get started with this and see how far we get. All right, as you see there, the life cycle is depicted as a bell curve. And I'm breaking the life cycle into 3 primary stages: incline, recline, decline. Okay? Now, one concept that I want to sort of put as an umbrella to this is the idea of ministry capacity. Ministry capacity. How much ministry can our church provide, and how well do we provide it? So you have a quantitative element, how much ministry, and a qualitative element, how well. Now, the church that is inclining is expanding its ministry capacity. Over time, it's doing more and more ministry better and better. Now, one of the key ingredients of this is mobilizing people. The more people that you mobilize for ministry, the more ministry then you can provide. Okay, so that's what incline looks like in the first blush. Recline is when the ministry capacity levels off. Okay, it levels off, so we're doing the same ministry, same level of quality over and over and over and over and over again. Another word that could go here would be the word plateau, but that ruins my rhyme scheme. Okay, now George Barna is a name some of you might know. He's a church analyst, writes a bunch of books. He makes a statement that churches in plateau don't realize they're in crisis. It's a very important statement. There are times when we sort of reached that plateau where it's more a sense of arrival. You know, we don't see it as crisis. We see it as attaining the summit. You know, we've reached the point where we can sort of kick back and relax. You know, we've worked really hard to get here, but now that we're here, we can just sort of bask in the glow and just keep this machinery running week after week, year after year, sometimes decade after decade. Now, the declining church is seeing its capacity shrink. Over time, we're doing less and less ministry, and that ministry quality is more and more compromised. So, for example, when I arrived in Phoenix to a church of 13 people, the ministry capacity was minuscule. You know, we had a Sunday morning, quote, worship service. I preached to 4 people one Sunday. It was Communion Sunday. The distribution of the elements was, just nothing to do, nothing going on, no capacity to make ministry happen. By the way, just so you'll get the kind of the vibe, this group of 13 people, there was 6 married couples, 1 single guy. 7 of them were active elders. Two were a father-son combination, and 3 were brothers. Okay? Interesting dynamics. We'll talk more about that later tomorrow. Now, there's a couple of principles, very important. The story of life cycle is always vitality lost over time. Just virtually any human endeavor tends to lose steam. You know, whatever it is that we're launching, you know, great vim and vigor, we launch, we're excited, we're committed, fizzles. You know, I remember last year, my wife's cousin was lamenting one day. She says, you know, my yoga class is way too crowded. This was in January. I said, wait till March. You'll have plenty of room. Okay? You know how that works? Great fire. Fizzles. That's the story. Now, what we want to do with the church life cycle, with revitalization, is we want to reverse that trend so that we're not losing over time. We're actually gaining vitality over time. Now, let me give you a picture of what that looks like. The temptation, you know, when you have declined, or if you've leveled off and started into decline, you know, whatever it is that you're declining from seems preferable to what you have now. So, you know, if you've got a life cycle, that's not the right one, is it? Let's try this one. Yeah, that works. Okay, if you've got a life cycle, and let's say you're somewhere on the backside of the life cycle, the way a lot of church folk want to do is they want to back up. You know, they want to kind of, you know, like Superman, you know, zoom around the earth, reverse time, and move back to some previous time in the church. Well, number one, time only moves in one direction, as far as I know, okay? And truth is, the circumstances, even if you completely recreated everything you had at that so-called prime time, you would be operating it in a different time. It wouldn't be the same. Okay? So the idea is not to reverse and try to recreate. What you do is wherever you are in the life cycle, you end the life cycle there. And you create a new life cycle by intentionally creating incline. Now, having done that once, then in the future, before the church lapses, you would create a new life cycle again. Okay? So the idea is to keep jumping the curve so that you don't stay on one life cycle through its conclusion. Okay, now there's a principle attached to this, and the principle is that church vitalization is going to range from moderate to severe depending on where you are on the life cycle. So, the church that is trying to create incline from the backside of the life cycle has got a lot more work to do than the church that's just trying to sort of course correct while still really healthy. So, the word to the wise here is change early in the life cycle as a choice rather than late in the life cycle as a response to crisis. The double jeopardy here is that the deeper the church is in the life cycle, the weaker it is. And the deeper it is, the more work it has to do. It's almost not fair. The church at its weakest has the most work to do. So this is why it's good for a church to grab hold of these concepts while it's still got some strength. Because you're talking about moderate adjustments from a position of strength, which is much easier to navigate. Okay? The danger is to allow status quo to just prevail forever. I like to say today's innovation is tomorrow's rut. Okay? Never fall in love with your methodology. It will become passé. I've always been kind of on the super contemporary side of ministry. And I remember in Phoenix coming home from church one Sunday, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, that was a great set of services, and, music was happening and blah, blah, blah. So we sit down to lunch, and my son, who was probably 15 at the time, says, Dad, what is with this tired music? What? Today's innovation is tomorrow's rut. It's like you can't see the cutting edge from here, okay? All righty. I really don't want to get much more into the life cycle at this point, because once we get started, and the next thing we'll have to go too deep. Let me share a couple of lovely books with you. Autopsy of a Deceased Church. This is the CSI approach to church revitalization. Very interesting book. It just, it's a kind of examination of cause of death for a number of churches. Tom Rainer is the author. Now, Tom Rainer was a speaker a couple of General Assemblies ago. Okay? There's another couple of books that I skipped over. Let me see if I can find those for you. I don't have the numbers. They're there somewhere. There we go. When it comes to spiritual renewal, this is my favorite book of the moment. It's called With. The author's name is Skye Jethani. S-K-Y-E, Jethani, Jethani. The John 15 passage about, abiding in me, it kind of deals with that issue. He talks about some wrong ways that people tend to relate to God, and then spends the second half of the book dealing with this idea of what is truly a life with God, rather than life under God, life over God, life from God, life for God. Where this book hit me, I don't want to try to explain the whole book, but the first four paradigms, like life from God, is I expect God to do my bidding. Life over God, I'm trying to control God by my obedience. Like, I'm being obedient, therefore you must do this. Okay, life under God is I see God as this capricious, being that I have to somehow appease. And I don't really struggle with those too much. But the fourth one killed me. It's called life for God. And that's when you get so caught up in the mission that you miss God. I don't know how that strikes you. That hit me right between the eyes. I'm a mission guy. I mean, morning, noon, and night, I'm on a crusade. And like I said, sometimes I wake up and I realize I'm following God, only he's not out there. All of a sudden I'm by myself. I get so caught up in getting it done that I leave the relationship with God out. So that was a real killer. I'm working through this with my 32-year-old daughter right now. It's been quite an exciting little span. Do your kids do like everything you wanted for their whole lives? Isn't that how it's supposed to be? Aren't they supposed to like not repeat our mistakes and stuff like that? I think not. Okay, now when it comes to strategic initiative, another Tom Rainer book, Simple Church. Just another recommendation. The idea of simple church is do a few things extremely well and make sure they're in alignment with each other, as opposed to sort of the smorgasbord of programs where, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing kind of thing, and you're spreading your resources too thin. So a couple of excellent books. Before I wrap up, are there any comments or questions before we wrap up? I want to give you a chance. I know you probably had enough. So we will start back at 8:30 in the morning. We'll be done by 12:30. Tomorrow we will fully flesh out the life cycle. Then we'll get heavily into the matrix. So let me pray for us, and we'll call it a night. Lord, I just thank you for your love for us. I thank you for not letting us rest until we found our way to you. I pray, Father, that you would bless our evening, that we might have a good time of rest. It's not that long before we have to be back here tomorrow, Father. I pray that this exercise this weekend would be an investment for the cause of Christ, that the things that we do, that we say, that we think will be glorifying to you and will strengthen us in our faith as we seek to serve you well. So send us out now in the strength of your Son by your Spirit. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right.
Just a reminder that tomorrow morning, 8:30 is when we're starting. So you want to be here before 8:30. And there is not breakfast. There is not breakfast available here tomorrow morning. We love you, but we want you to eat at home before you come. We're starting at 8:30. Make sure you come well fed for some more food here, but not the real food. See you in the morning. Also, if you are into preemptive prayer and you're a man, there is a group meeting tomorrow morning to pray, right, Paul? Where are you going to be? In the hub? In the hub at 7:30. In the hub at 7:30, a men's prayer time.